The notification came at 11:14 on a Friday night. I was at my desk in the spare room, going through a rate comparison for a client in the distribution sector who needed my notes by Monday morning. My phone was face up beside the keyboard. It lit up. A comment notification from a man named Bren Hazlitt, someone I had known since university, on a post I had not been tagged in. I clicked through. The photograph had been posted 6 hours earlier. It showed a ribbon cutting in front of a gym I recognized from the address, a building I had visited twice during the renovation, a space that existed in its current form because of $190,000 I had transferred in 2 installments over the previous 14 months. My brother was in the center of the frame holding oversized ceremonial scissors, grinning, surrounded by a group of people I had never met. The caption read, "We did it. Thank you to everyone who helped make this real." I set the phone down on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then I picked it back up and looked at the photograph again. I was not in it. My name is Martin Veal. I am 52 years old. I spent 22 years as an operations director for a transportation and logistics company based in Edmonton. And for the last 4 years, I have done independent consulting work for mid-sized businesses in the same sector. I tell you what I do for a living because it is not incidental. The central skill in logistics operations is mapping the distance between what is on paper and what is actually moving. A shipment can look correct on a manifest and still be 3 days late and 2 provinces away from where it needs to be. You learn to read the gap. You learn to ask the question that no one has asked yet, not because you are suspicious by nature, but because the gap has a cost, and the cost has a direction. And if you do not find it, someone else's operation pays for your oversight. I am not a particularly confrontational person. I don't have a temper in the way some men do. I tend to go quiet when something troubles me, and I tend to think before I move, sometimes for longer than is comfortable. That is who I am. It matters because the man I am is precisely the man Joel had counted on. Joel is my younger brother. He is 39 years old. We grew up in a town called Lacombe in central Alberta, 2 boys in a house that ran on routine and not much surplus. Our father ran a small plumbing supply business for 26 years. Our mother taught grade 4. There was no softness in how they worked, but there was no meanness either. What they gave us was an example, not a fortune. I ended up in logistics by a combination of aptitude and circumstance. Joel ended up in several things before he found the one that held. He had charm and energy in a way I never did. He could walk into a room and change the temperature of it, which is a quality I have watched people underestimate and also overestimate, sometimes in the same year. His 30s were difficult. A marriage that began with real hope and ended with neither party particularly at fault, just 2 people who turned out not to fit the shape of each other's lives. A fitness studio management role that folded when the owner retired and sold the building out from under the staff. A period of about 18 months where he was piecing things together and I helped where I could. Quietly, without announcement, the way you do for a brother when you are the one who has it steadier. I do not say this to establish credit. I say it because it is the context in which Joel came to me with the business plan. He had been working toward it for almost 2 years. A gym, not a commercial chain, something genuine. A training facility with a serious approach to programming, the kind of space serious athletes drove across the city to use. He wanted to build it in a light industrial area outside the downtown core, where the rent was manageable and the square footage was real. He had done the research. The business plan he showed me was not a wish list. It was a proper document. Projected revenue per membership tier, equipment costs itemized by vendor, renovation estimates with a contingency line. He had spoken to 3 accountants. He had walked the space with a contractor and come back with written figures. I read the plan twice. I asked him questions over 2 separate conversations. I told him I thought it was viable, which I genuinely did. We discussed the money as a loan, not a gift. He was clear on that, and I respected him for it. We agreed on an informal repayment schedule, modest monthly amounts once the business reached a defined profitability threshold, with a formal written agreement to be drafted by his accountant before the first transfer. The total was $190,000, delivered in 2 installments over 3 months. I still have the transfer records. Renata had been in the picture for about 16 months by then. She was 35, worked in brand development, and she was one of the most composed people I had ever sat across from at a dinner table. She remembered which wine I had mentioned preferring, asked questions about my consulting work that were specific rather than polite, knew the name of a project I had mentioned once in passing 3 months earlier. I registered all of this as attentiveness. It took me a while to understand it as something else entirely. The written agreement Joel's accountant was supposed to draft never appeared. I followed up twice in the first 6 months, both times by text, both times with a casual tone, because I did not want to signal distrust in a relationship where trust had not yet been violated. Joel told me it was coming. There had been some scheduling issues with the accountant. He would have it to me within the month. I let it sit. The renovation was ongoing, the money was moving, and I told myself, and this is the thing I want to be honest about, I told myself that a signed agreement mattered less between brothers than it would between strangers. I believed that. I was wrong about it. The soft opening of the gym happened on a Thursday evening in early November. I found out about it on the following Friday night, 6 hours after it had ended, through a photograph on a platform I checked maybe twice a week. I sat at my desk for a while after I put the phone down. Then I called Joel. He picked up on the third ring, and his voice had that particular warmth in it that I recognized from years of knowing him. The warmth that is slightly elevated, slightly prepared, the warmth of someone who knows the conversation is going to require management. He told me the opening had been very last minute, very small, just a handful of people from the training community. Nobody would have made the trip for something that informal. He said there would be a proper launch event in the spring, bigger, more organized, and of course he would want me there for that. He said it easily. I told him that sounded good. I said I would love to see the place and asked when it would suit him for me to come by. He said any time, absolutely, just let him know. I drove out the following Tuesday without calling ahead. The gym was on a street I had not been to before, a converted industrial block that had clearly seen significant investment recently. I walked in at 9:30 in the morning. The space was striking. High ceilings, exposed ductwork painted matte black, a training floor that had been laid with the kind of rubber that does not come cheap. The equipment was premium, not the mid-range brands from the original vendor list in the business plan, but the tier above them. The fit-out had gone considerably beyond what the budget I had reviewed would have produced. I spent about 20 minutes walking the floor before Joel came out of the back office. He gave me the tour with genuine pride. I listened. I asked about the equipment, and he told me he had upgraded some lines when better deals became available. I asked casually what the final renovation figure had landed at. He gave me a number that was roughly $40,000 higher than the contractor estimate he had shown me. I nodded and said construction always runs over. He agreed. We had coffee at the reception counter and talked about the early membership numbers, which were modest but not discouraging for a first week. I drove home and told myself it was probably exactly that. Costs had run over, as they always do, and the upgrade decisions had been reasonable calls made in the field. I was wrong. I knew I was wrong by the time I reached the highway, but I needed a few more days to admit it to myself. I called Philip Darrow that Thursday. Philip had spent 18 years in commercial lending and financial analysis before he moved to independent advisory work, and he had been a colleague and then a close friend for long enough that I trusted his honesty over his diplomacy. I explained the situation without editorializing. He told me that without a signed loan agreement, my position was genuinely complicated. Not impossible to defend, but complicated. The bank transfer records would establish the movement of funds. What I needed was written acknowledgement from Joel that the money was a loan rather than a gift. He told me to go through my email archive carefully before we spoke again. I found it that evening. 2 emails. The first, sent 9 days after the initial transfer. "Thanks, Mart, this is going to work. I can feel it. I'll get the repayment structure sorted once the contractor is finished, probably end of March." The second, sent 4 months later after a phone call in which I had mentioned the agreement again. "Still on my list. Sorry for the delay. We'll get this done." That was 17 months ago. I called Greta Foss the following week. Greta had done internal auditing for the logistics firm during my last 4 years there, and I had done her a significant professional favor when she was navigating a difficult situation with a department head. She owed me one, and she knew it, and when I explained what I needed, she said she would take a look. She called me back 5 days later and said what she had found in the accessible financial records was, as she put it, worth a conversation. The renovation costs were legitimate and substantial, but over a 14-month period, there had also been a series of transfers from the business operating account to a personal joint account held by Joel and Renata. The transfers were irregular, different amounts, uneven timing, no obvious alignment with renovation milestones or supplier payments. The total across all of them was approximately $54,000. Greta was careful with her language. She said there were explanations consistent with sloppy bookkeeping rather than deliberate misappropriation. Small business owners mixed personal and business expenses constantly, especially in the first year, especially under financial pressure. But the pattern was irregular enough that it was worth understanding. I wrote $54,000 on a notepad and left it on my desk. I kept calling Joel on a roughly weekly schedule, the same way I always had. I asked about memberships, about the programming he was building, about a strength coach he had mentioned wanting to hire. He was enthusiastic about all of it. I listened and I said nothing. Yet, I want to say something here because I know from conversations I have had that this kind of thing, money moved through family, and the slow recognition that something has gone quietly sideways, is not an uncommon experience. The part that nobody talks about honestly is the loneliness of it. Not the anger, not whatever word you want to use for betrayal, but the specific loneliness of sitting with information you cannot yet use and turning over in your mind which version of someone you love is the version that is actually true. If that is where you are right now, what I found was that clarity, even when it costs something, is always more survivable in the end than the kind of patience that is really just avoidance wearing a better coat. If this channel has been worth your time, subscribing takes about 3 seconds, and it lets me keep making these for the people who need them. About 6 weeks after the Tuesday visit, Renata called me. It was a Sunday afternoon. She asked how I was doing, mentioned she had been meaning to call, said that the first months of a new business had a way of consuming everything, including basic communication. She was warm, not artificially, but warm with that slight measure to it I had come to recognize. She got to the point after about 4 minutes. The commercial liability insurance renewal had landed at the same time as a supplier payment, and they were about $8,800 short for the month. Was there any chance I could help bridge it, just temporarily? She said just temporarily, the way people say things they have practiced into sounding offhand. I told her I was glad she called and that I would absolutely like to help. I asked her to email me the insurance renewal notice and the supplier invoice so I could see what we were working with. And while she was at it, I said, could she ask Joel to send me the drafted loan agreement? We really should have that in place before any additional funds moved, just to keep everything clean on both sides. She said, of course, no problem at all. She would get Joel on it that afternoon. The invoice did not come. The agreement did not come. 3 weeks later, she called again. This time the amount was $12,500, and the issue was a commercial HVAC unit that had developed a fault with the primary compressor. I said the same thing. Send me the service quote and ask Joel to send the agreement. She said, of course, absolutely, right away. I did not hear from either of them. What I understood at this point was not complicated. A person who genuinely intended to produce a document would produce it. The inability to send a standard invoice or a drafted loan agreement was not administrative. It was informational. Joel called me about 9 weeks after my visit. He said he had been doing a lot of thinking, and he wanted to sit down properly and have a real conversation about the loan and where things stood. He sounded resolved. He sounded like a man who had arrived at a decision. I assumed, and I want to be honest about this because it is part of what happened, I assumed he was going to come in with something real. Numbers, a timeline, possibly the agreement already prepared. I drove to meet him carrying a reasonable degree of hope, which is not something I say without noticing how it reads, given what came next. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the gym, which had been his suggestion. He was 12 minutes late. He sat down, ordered, and talked about the gym for a few minutes. The membership numbers were improving. A corporate wellness contract was in early discussion. He felt like the corner was beginning to turn. I let him talk. Then he got to the proposal. He would begin contributing toward the loan repayment starting in the new year, he said. The amounts would be modest at first, around $300 a month, but they would increase as the business found its footing. He wanted to be realistic, he said. He used that word twice. He looked at me with the expression of a man who believes he has just offered something honorable. I sat with that for a moment. At $300 a month, it would take just over 52 years to repay $190,000, which meant Joel would be 91 years old and I would not be around to receive the final check. I did not say this. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and placed a folder on the table between us. I want to be precise about how I went through it because the manner matters as much as the content. I did not raise my voice. I did not use words like dishonesty or betrayal. I opened the folder the way I used to open a logistics audit with a client whose operation had a gap in it. Item by item, in order, without editorializing. The 2 emails in which Joel had acknowledged the loan. Philip's written summary of the legal position and what documentation would be needed to establish the intent of the transfers. Greta's summary of the $54,000 in irregular transfers to the personal joint account. The original business plan Joel had handed me, the one with the equipment budget and the repayment framework, the document that had never been formalized. I paused at the $54,000 page. I told Joel I was not sitting across from him to accuse him of anything. I genuinely did not know what those transfers were for, and I was not prepared to assume. What I needed before any repayment conversation happened was to understand them. He was looking at the table. Renata was not there. That had been a deliberate choice. I had not suggested dinner at their place, had not gone to the apartment, had met him in a neutral space 2 blocks from the gym with no third person managing exits or managing the temperature of the room. What that meant was that when Joel's face moved through its stages, the initial steadiness, then something slower and harder to categorize, then the particular stillness that comes when a man accepts that the room he thought he was in is not the room he is actually in. None of it was managed for an audience. It was just the 2 of us and the folder and the coffee getting cold. I told him what I needed in the next 2 weeks. A full accounting of the $54,000, itemized and documented. A repayment proposal for the full $190,000 that reflected a schedule a commercial lender would find credible. Not aspirational, credible. If he delivered those 2 things, we would handle it between us, as brothers, without involving anyone outside this table. If he did not, I had a contact at a commercial recovery firm that Philip had provided, and what followed from that conversation would be expensive, time-consuming, and not quiet. I collected my copies, left his on the table, and stood up. I put on my jacket. I said, I drove out here because you're my brother. Don't make me drive back to a different conclusion. Then I left. The 6 days that followed were quiet in the way that has actual weight. Joel did not call on the first day or the second. I worked. I slept adequately. I did not talk about it with anyone. On the 6th day, just after 7 in the evening, my phone rang and it was Joel. The call was not what I had prepared for, and I want to describe it accurately. He did not break. He did not perform remorse. What he did was go very quiet after I said his name, a silence that lasted perhaps 12 seconds, which is a long time when you are holding a phone and waiting. Then he started talking. The renovation costs had run over the projections significantly in the first 3 months, and he had not called me because he was ashamed. Ashamed that the business he had brought to my kitchen table with a documented plan was already running behind its own numbers before the doors opened. He had moved money from the business account to the joint account to cover debts Renata had carried into the relationship. Debts she had not fully disclosed before their finances merged, and he had told himself he would replace the funds before the picture became visible. He had spent 6 months believing that the membership growth would arrive in time to close the gap before he had to explain it. He had let his pride turn what should have been a conversation into a financial problem. He said he was sorry. He said it more than once. I did not offer him anything on that call that I did not actually have, and telling him I forgave everything before I had processed any of it would have been its own kind of dishonesty. I told him I had hurt him. I told him what I needed was still exactly what I had put on the table at the coffee shop. On the 13th day, a courier package arrived at my door. Inside it was a document, 11 pages, notarized, signed, and witnessed. A full accounting of the $54,000, Renata's consolidated personal debts from before the relationship, a vehicle purchase made during the build, 6 months of personal draws Joel had taken to maintain the appearance of a stable operation when the membership income was not yet covering it, a repayment schedule for the full $190,000 at $750 a month, with an escalation clause tied to monthly gross revenue thresholds, and a provision at the 3-year mark that gave me the option to convert my outstanding balance into a 5% equity stake at my discretion. It was honest, and it was complete, and it was theirs. They had built it, signed it, had it witnessed, and sent it by courier. I read it twice at the kitchen table. I signed my copy. I sent Joel's executed copy back the following morning. Several months have passed. Joel and I are not what we were before the November photograph. I do not expect us to return to exactly that position, and I am not sure it would mean the same thing if we did. Some things recalibrate after being pushed past a certain load, and the new position is not worse necessarily, it is just more accurate, and you carry an awareness of it that you did not have before. We speak once or twice a week. The corporate wellness contract came through in February. The membership numbers are running ahead of the revised projections, which were written with cleaner eyes than the first set. I became a member of the gym in late January. It felt wrong not to use the thing I had helped build. I go Tuesday and Thursday mornings. The early sessions are usually 5 or 6 people. The sound of equipment, the light coming in low through the east-facing windows. One Thursday a few weeks ago, I arrived before the session started and sat on a bench near the entrance while Joel finished setting up the floor. There is a row of rowing machines along the far wall, positioned in front of a floor-to-ceiling window that faces the street. That window was in the original business plan. Joel had sketched the layout on a piece of paper during the second conversation we ever had about the gym, a rough, hand-drawn floor plan, and he had drawn a circle around that window and written beside it, "This is what makes the whole room." I remember reading that and thinking it was the kind of detail an excited person puts on paper when they are imagining something at its best, before the real work begins and the details change. He was right. The morning light comes through it at an angle that takes up the whole far end of the space, and the rowers are positioned exactly where the sketch placed them, And when the class is moving, there is something in the way the room functions that you cannot call accidental. He had known what he was building from the beginning. That part, at least, had always been true. Joel glanced over from the far end of the floor. He gave me a nod, not warm, not cold, just present. Two men who know what the other one knows and who are both still here. I laced up and waited for the class to start.